The morning Grace Sutton finally said the words out loud. She had been rehearsing them for months. She delivered them in the front hallway, her son standing 6 feet away in silence, while Naomi stood completely still. One bag at her feet, coat folded over her arm, expression unchanged. You don't belong in this family. You never did. What Grace didn't know, the bag had been packed the night before. The call had already been made, and 3 miles east of the estate gate, 3 black SUVs were already moving, bearing a logo that would make everything Grace thought she understood about power unravel in the next 14 minutes. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 months earlier, Naomi Sutton had arrived at the Sutton estate for the first of what would become the last season of Sunday dinners. She drove herself, as she always did, a gray sedan, 6 years old, the kind of car that required no comment. She parked in the circular drive, took her bag from the passenger seat, and stood for a moment looking at the house. It was large and well-maintained in the way that houses are when the person maintaining them has spent decades proving something. Wide stone steps. A front door with polished brass hardware. Window boxes that were bare now, in early autumn, but would have been meticulous all summer. She had been here before. She knew the grammar of the house, the rooms that were used and the rooms that were for display, the conversations that were welcome, and the ones that quietly weren't. She rang the bell anyway. Grace Sutton answered the door herself. She was 65, trim, with the posture of someone who had been told young that how you held yourself told people everything. She looked at Naomi the way she always looked at her, assessing, unhurried, and landing somewhere just short of welcoming. "Caden's inside," she said. "He's been waiting. Not hello. Not come in." Just a redirect, as though Naomi were a delivery requiring disposition. Naomi thanked her and went inside. The living room had the particular energy of a family gathering already in motion. Derek Sutton, Caden's older brother, was seated near the fireplace with a glass of something amber, deep in conversation with a man Naomi didn't recognize. Derek's wife, Pamela, was in the armchair across from them, turned toward a side table of canapes, and choosing to ignore the business conversation with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for 12 years. And at the far end of the room, near the bookshelves, stood a small woman in her early 80s with white hair, and the stillness of someone who had long since decided that watching was more useful than performing. Ruth Sutton, Caden's grandmother, the one person in this family who had ever asked Naomi a genuine question and then actually listened to the answer. Naomi crossed the room toward her. Ruth's eyes tracked the movement, and when Naomi reached her, the older woman's expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile but was warmer than the room's ambient temperature. "You came," Ruth said. "I always come. You always come." And she always does that thing at the door. Ruth tilted her head in the direction of the hallway. 40 years, and it's the same door, different people, same test. Naomi set her bag down near the bookshelf. "Does anyone pass?" Ruth considered this. Victor passed, eventually, but it took him most of a decade. Naomi said nothing. Victor had been Caden's father, deceased 3 years now. She had not known him. She sometimes thought she would have liked to. Caden found her 10 minutes later. He was 38 floors of good architect, careful with proportion, attentive to light, naturally at ease in spaces he understood. He kissed her on the cheek and said, I was wondering when you'd get here." "Traffic was fine," she said. "I just came in through the side entrance by mistake." He smiled. He had a good smile when he used it. "Mom said dinner's at 7. Derek wants to talk about the Meridian Tower bid. He's been doing that to everyone this week." "What's Meridian Tower?" "A project. Big one. Private developer. Anonymous backing. If we land it," he stopped himself, re-evaluated. "Derek says it could change everything for the firm. He's been working the connections for months." Naomi looked toward the fireplace, where Derek was still talking, hands moving in the particular way of a man who was describing something he wanted badly. "What's the developer's name? That's the thing." Caden lowered his voice slightly, though no one was close enough to hear. "The backer is private, completely. Derek's been trying to find the right introduction for 8 months, and nobody can get through. He shook his head. It's like the decision maker doesn't exist. Some people are careful about that, Naomi said. He looked at her. Something crossed his face, a flicker of curiosity, or maybe just the reflex of a man who had learned not to ask. Yeah, he said. I guess they are. The dinner that evening was fine in the way that family dinners are when everyone is performing a version of harmony. Grace managed the table with precision. Seats arranged, topics pursued, subjects redirected. Naomi ate her food and listened more than she spoke. She answered 2 questions directly, deflected 1, and noticed which conversations stopped when she entered them. At some point after the main course, Derek mentioned the Meridian Tower again, this time to the full table, with the particular authority of a man who had decided the subject was safe for general consumption. Our technical proposal is the strongest we've done in 5 years, he said. If the decision gets made on merit, we win. Grace looked up from her plate. It won't get made on merit. Nothing does. Then we need the right introduction, Derek said. Someone inside. Naomi passed the bread basket to Ruth without being asked. Ruth had covered hers briefly on the handle, a small, familiar gesture. Thank you, Ruth said, quietly. The word landing the way words do when they mean more than their syllables. Naomi nodded. She did not look at the table. She looked at her plate and thought about a memo she had read that morning, the weekly status report from her chief of staff, Margot Chen, and specifically the line near the bottom. Meridian Tower Review Committee convenes in 6 weeks. Independent oversight per conflict recusal filing, dated September 14. She had filed that recusal herself. The morning she'd seen Sutton Architecture's name on the bid list, she had called Elliot immediately and done the correct thing, no hesitation. The decision was not hers to make. She picked up her glass. Across the table, Derek was explaining to the room at large why the right connection would make all the difference. She drank her water and said nothing. After dinner, when the family had moved to the drawing room and the conversations had splintered into smaller ones, Grace appeared at Naomi's elbow. Not confrontational. Just present, in the way Grace was always present. A fact requiring acknowledgement. You were quiet tonight, Grace observed. I usually am. Grace studied her. Caden needs someone who engages with his family's work, someone who understands what it means to be in the Sutton name. She paused, letting the sentence do its work. I'm not sure you've fully committed to that. Naomi looked at her. She did not look away. I'll think about what you said, she told her, and turned back toward the room. On the way home, she drove in silence. She didn't turn the radio on. She thought about 6 weeks, about what could change and what was already decided. When she got home, she set her bag down and sat at the desk in the small study. She opened her laptop and reviewed a document she had been drafting for 2 weeks, an estate accounting, a list of properties, a structure she had been quietly confirming would hold, legally and financially, before she needed it to. She saved the document, closed the laptop. She went to find her phone and called Elliot James. He answered on the first ring. I need the final version of the post-nuptial analysis on my desk by Friday, she said. You'll have it Wednesday, he said. Wednesday is fine. She ended the call and stood at the window of the study, looking out at the dark street. Inside the Sutton estate, dinner would still be wrapping up. Grace would be directing the cleanup. Derek would be refining his pitch. Caden would be somewhere in the middle of it, agreeing with whoever had spoken last. She pulled her notebook from her jacket pocket and wrote 1 line. 6 weeks. Then we'll know. She closed the notebook. She was already beginning to understand what the answer would be. There were 2 versions of Naomi's life, and she had kept them separate with the same care that certain people keep a second language, fluent in both, never letting one bleed into the other. The first version. Naomi Sutton. 36, wife of an architect, drove herself to Sunday dinners and passed the bread basket without being asked. She answered questions about her work with the phrase consulting, mostly private sector, and let people fill in the rest. She wore the kind of clothes that lasted. She knew where to sit at a dinner table to be useful without being visible. She had been practicing this version for 3 years. The second version, Naomi Foster, sole trustee and controlling executive of Foster Holdings Group, a private investment trust founded by her father, Arthur Foster, and restructured under her authority following his death 14 months ago. The trust controlled $8 billion in assets, commercial real estate portfolios across 4 states, controlling stakes in 2 mid-sized development funds, minority positions in regional infrastructure projects, and a cash reserve that gave her the ability to move quickly when opportunities required it. Every Monday morning, she sat at the head of a conference table with a team of 11 and made decisions that moved capital across cities. Her name did not appear in press releases. Her photographs were not in annual reports. To the outside world, Foster Holdings had an executive structure with a titled CEO, a CFO, and an advisory board. Naomi was listed internally only as principal authority. This was not accidental. Arthur Foster had built the trust on a single operational principle, which he had stated plainly and often. People show you who they are before they know what you're worth. Give them the chance to do that. Never take it away from them early. He had learned this through the inverse, had watched relationships and partnerships fracture the moment someone realized what the Foster name meant. He had decided, late in his career, that the cleanest way to know someone was to let them know you without the number first. He had raised Naomi on this principle the way other fathers raise children on religion or work ethic. Not as a rule, but as a worldview. She had tested it, believed in it, and eventually had a reason to rely on it. The reason was a man named Marcus. She had been 29. He was thoughtful and kind for 8 months. Then a colleague mentioned, at a dinner party, what the Foster name was connected to. Marcus hadn't said anything that evening, but the following week, every conversation had a new texture. He began mentioning events she might attend in an official capacity. He asked once whether she had any connection to a particular development project in the north of the city. He suggested, gently, that her name might be useful in a certain introduction. She ended it quietly. She did not explain why, but she decided something. The next person who stayed in her life would stay because of who she was before they learned what she carried. Caden Sutton had been that test. She had met him at a public architecture exhibit. Not an industry event, just the kind of evening that a city puts on and that anyone can walk into. He had been standing in front of a rendering of a mixed-use residential development, and she had been looking at the same thing because she had genuine opinions about the load-bearing logic in the courtyard design. They had talked for 40 minutes without introducing themselves. When they finally exchanged names, he said, "Caden, I design buildings," she said. "Naomi, I work in private finance," he said. "That sounds like it requires a lot of patience with numbers," she said. "More with people." He laughed. It was a real laugh. She had tested the instinct carefully over the following months. He called when he said he would. He did not ask for introductions. When she told him that her professional life was something she kept private, he said, "That's fair. I don't need to know your resume to know if I want to keep talking to you." She had filed that away. It felt like something worth protecting. They had been married for 2 years. On the Monday after the first Sunday dinner at the estate, Naomi sat at the head of the Foster Holdings conference table and signed 3 capital allocation decisions that represented a combined deployment of $94 million. Her CFO walked through the quarterly analysis. Her legal counsel confirmed 2 pending regulatory clearances. Her chief of staff, Margot Chen, 41, efficient in the way of someone who had been doing essential work long enough to have stripped out everything non-essential, ran through the week's calendar with the precision of a person who understood that Naomi's time was not infinite. After the others left, Margot stayed. "You have 1 flagged item," Margot said, setting a single printed page on the table. "Meridian Tower. The conflict recusal is on file. Independent review committee convenes in 5 weeks. They've requested a technical addendum from 3 of the bidders." Naomi looked at the page. The 3 firms requesting addendums were listed by code, not name. Foster Holdings' internal records mapped and the codes to actual firms, but Naomi did not open that file. She had made a decision in September when she'd first seen the bid list. She would not look at Sutton Architecture's proposal, would not review their standing, and would not allow herself to have any information that could be construed as influence. She had called Elliot the same afternoon and filed the paperwork by end of day. "Keep the committee process clean," she said. "If anyone on the review committee asks whether we have any preferences among the bidders, the answer is that the recusal is complete and we have no view." Margot made a note. "Understood. And if Caden calls the public line for any reason, he hasn't. If he does, route it to the standard inquiry process. No special handling." Margot nodded. She had never asked about Naomi's marriage. She was good enough at her job to understand that the information would arrive when it was needed and not a moment before. After Margot left, Naomi sat alone in the conference room. The city stretched out through the north-facing windows, buildings she had looked at for years, some of which she knew better from the inside than from the street. She had spent 12 years building this, not performing it. Building it quietly, from the ground up, with the same attention to load-bearing logic that she had noticed in Caden's exhibit rendering 3 years ago. She thought about the dinner table, about Derek's hands moving when he described the project he couldn't reach, about Grace's comment, "I'm not sure you've fully committed to that," about Caden nodding at something his mother said without quite hearing it. She opened her notebook and wrote one line. "The question is not whether the wall comes down. It is what's standing when it does." She closed the notebook, picked up her bag, and walked out to the next meeting. The Sutton estate had a grammar, and over the following weeks, Naomi learned it the way she learned most things, by observation, cross-reference, and careful use. The grammar went like this. Sunday dinners began at 7, with cocktails at 6:30 in the drawing room where the art was. The art was selected to tell a specific story about the family. European, old money and aesthetic, if not in fact, the kind of collection that said we have always had taste to anyone who didn't look too closely. Seating at dinner was assigned, never discussed, and it was not accidental. Grace sat at the head of the table nearest the kitchen. Derek sat to her right. Caden sat to her left. Naomi sat at the far end, across from Ruth, where the light was slightly worse, and the conversation required effort to follow. Nobody announced the arrangement. It simply was, the way things are when someone has been managing a room for long enough that the management becomes invisible. Ruth had a different relationship to the grammar. She observed it with the particular attention of someone who had watched a production run long enough to have memorized the blocking and was no longer surprised by any of the exits. It was Ruth who explained, on the third Sunday, why Grace had redirected the conversation when a developer named Richard Call had almost recognized Naomi. "She does it to everyone," Ruth said. They were in the small sitting room after dinner. The rest of the family dispersed. Derek toward the study, Caden toward his phone, Grace toward the kitchen with the authority of someone who preferred managing logistics to managing relationships. Anyone she doesn't understand gets managed, not personally, structurally. Naomi looked at her. What does she not understand about me? Ruth considered the question seriously. That was something Naomi had noticed early. Ruth took questions seriously. She didn't perform consideration. She actually did it. "She doesn't understand what you're for," Ruth said at last. "In her model, everyone in this family has a function. Derek manages money. Caden creates buildings. Pamela manages Derek's public life. I am tolerated because I'm old and the alternative would be unseemly." She paused. "You don't have an assigned function. That makes you a variable. And she doesn't like variables. She has been eliminating variables for 40 years. Ruth picked up her coffee. "You're the most interesting one she's encountered in some time." Naomi thought about this, about the conversations that pivoted away when she entered them, about the seating arrangement, about the question, what she actually did, being answered by Grace, before Naomi could open her mouth. "She called my work managing the household," Naomi said. "I know." I was at the other end of the table. Ruth set the cup down. She believed it when she said it. That's the more interesting thing. Outside, a car door. Derek heading somewhere. The house settling into its end of evening rhythms. "She's going to push harder," Ruth said. Not a question. A reading of a pattern she had been watching for months. She's been building towards something for a while. I can see it in the way she moves around the dinner table. She looked at Naomi steadily. "I don't know exactly what you do, but I know it's real." You carry it the way people carry things that actually matter. The stillness isn't emptiness, it's the opposite. Naomi looked at her for a moment. The older woman's eyes were the particular sharp blue of someone who had not stopped paying attention. "Thank you," Naomi said. "That's the most direct thing anyone in this family has said to me." "The rest of them aren't looking," Ruth said simply. "I have time to look." The following Sunday, Simone Park attended dinner for the first time. She arrived with Grace, which was information. Grace had driven 40 minutes to collect her, which was more information. She was introduced as an old family friend we've been missing terribly, delivered in the warm, authoritative tone Grace used when presenting something she had already decided was true. Simone was 34, with the particular ease of someone who had grown up in the specific social register where ease was cultivated early. Her father was a developer with regional connections. Her family name appeared on a building near the waterfront that Naomi had passed 100 times. She was pleasant without being warm and engaging without being curious, a combination Naomi recognized as a performance refined through years of rooms exactly like this one. She sat in the chair that was, by convention, Naomi's, not because Grace had directed her there explicitly, because when Simone arrived, Grace had said, "We'll make room, come sit here," and had gestured at that chair, and no one at the table had looked at Naomi to calibrate whether that was all right. Caden hadn't looked. Derek hadn't. Even Pamela, who was perfectly decent in private, had been looking at her phone. Naomi sat 2 chairs down and said nothing. Across the table, Ruth watched the whole thing without expression. At one point, she caught Naomi's eye and tilted her head almost imperceptibly. A question. Naomi shook her head just as slightly. "Not yet." Ruth understood and looked back at her soup. The conversation that evening orbited Simone in the comfortable way that conversations orbit people who are known and familiar to most of the room. There were references Naomi didn't have, shared memories of events she hadn't attended. Grace laughed at something from years ago, and Simone laughed with her, and Caden said something that made both of them laugh more. He didn't look at Naomi when he laughed. She ate her soup. She passed the bread. She asked Derek one question about the Meridian Tower review timeline that he answered without registering why she was asking it. "Still 6 weeks out," he said. "Still no direct contact with the decision-makers." He shook his head. "It's like they don't want to be found. Some decisions are better when they're clean," Naomi said. Derek looked at her. "Sure," he said, in the tone of a man who was agreeing with something he didn't find relevant. Then he turned back to Simone. On the drive home, Naomi called Elliot. "The post-nuptial framework," she said. "I want the final version on my desk." "You'll have it Friday," he said. "Friday is fine." She kept her eyes on the road, and Elliot run the conflict clause once more. "The Meridian Tower recusal should be watertight." "It is. Filed in September, fully documented. Nothing touches you." "Good." She hung up. The road was dark and the car was quiet. She turned onto the highway and set the cruise control. She thought about the chair she had not sat in, about the laughter she had not been part of, about 6 weeks and what would need to happen before then, and what she had already set in motion. She was very good at being patient, but she had been practicing it for years. But she had also learned, the hard way, from Marcus and from others, that patience without preparation was just hoping. She was not hoping, she was ready. The highway ran straight ahead, lit pale by her headlights, and she drove toward home thinking clearly about everything that was coming. The Meridian Tower project had started for Sutton Architecture as an opportunity and become something closer to an obsession. Derek explained the full picture on a Saturday afternoon in early October in the estate's study, a room that functioned as an informal boardroom when occasion required it. He had printed materials, which was not always his style, but the dimmer was not enough that he wanted them visible and attributable. $45 million in design fees, he said, setting the first page on the table where both Naomi and Caden could piece it. Paid in 4 tranches across an 18-month design cycle. Plus preferential position on the construction oversight contract if we deliver on Phase 1. He set another page down. This would be the largest single commission in the firm's history by a factor of 3. Caden looked at the numbers with the focus he brought to anything structural. the same close attention he gave to load calculations, with the same minimal expression that meant he was taking it seriously and reserving judgment. What's the catch? The catch is process. Derek leaned back. The developer is anonymous, not unusual for a project this size. The holding company is registered in a name that doesn't correspond to any public-facing entity, and every attempt we've made to find a direct contact has gone to a third party. There is no side door. There is no call to return. That's by design, Caden said. Obviously, it's by design. The question is what the design is protecting. Derek looked at him, which is why we submitted the strongest technical proposal we've done. If the decision is made on merit, our work speaks for itself. If it isn't, if they want a relationship with a connected firm, a family name they recognize, someone in the right room at the right time, then we're competing for something we can't reach from where we are. Naomi sat at the far end of the table with a cup of coffee and said nothing. She had been listening to this conversation develop over 2 months. She had been in the same room where the decision would ultimately be made, had, in fact, already removed herself from it. She thought about telling them. She thought about exactly what that conversation would look like. She thought about it for approximately 4 seconds and then let it go. There was nothing useful she could tell them. She was recused, the committee had the file, the process would run. I think you'll hear something by mid-November, she said. Derek looked at her. What makes you say that? She shrugged. Review processes at that scale usually run 10 to 12 weeks from submission. You submitted in August. 6 weeks left, roughly. He considered this. That's reasonable. He wrote something on the corner of his notes. I'd been thinking December. Could be December, she said, but I'd be surprised. She was right about mid-November. She knew she was right because Margot's status updates indicated that the Independent Review Committee had set its decision date for the 12th, and she had reviewed that memo the same way she reviewed every memo in the Meridian Tower folder, without opening the underlying documents, without looking at the bid rankings, without using any information that had not already been sanitized of personal relevance. It was a discipline. She kept it. Caden found her in the east sitting room after Derek had left, where she was reading an article on a municipal drainage project in the north part of the state that she was tracking for unrelated reasons. He sat in the chair across from her and looked at her for a moment. What do you think about it? He asked. The project. I think it's a real opportunity. She turned a page. I think you should let the work do what work does. Derek's been spending a lot of energy on the connection angle, trying to find the right introduction. He thinks there's a way in, that someone knows someone. She looked up from the article. What do you think? He was quiet for a moment. He had the quality, rare in people, common in good architects, of actually sitting with a question before answering it. I think our proposal is the right one for this project, he said. I've been over the technical specs 3 times. The design is right. I'd rather win it on that than win it on a phone call. She looked at him. There was something in that moment, the particularity of a man saying the thing she had been thinking and meaning it, that landed in a way she had not expected. She had not expected to be moved by it. She was. I think that's right, she said. He smiled. The real one. You always say exactly that much and no more. I say what I mean. I know. He leaned back. I know you do. She went back to her article. He stayed in the room, not talking, reading something on his phone. The afternoon light moved across the floor. For a little while it was easy. For a little while it was the thing she had married, the two of them in a room together, present without needing anything from each other. She noticed the ease of it. She noted it the way she noted things, clearly, without sentimentality, as information. That night, lying awake, she turned over what she had told Derek about the timeline. She had not lied. The timeline she had given was accurate, but it had come from her other calendar, her other life, a file she was not supposed to be using to inform this one. She was careful. She was always careful. She had given them nothing actionable, nothing that affected the outcome, nothing that crossed the recusal. But she had let the 2 lives touch, briefly, in a way she usually didn't. She noted that too. In the morning she called Margot and confirmed, again, that nothing from the Meridian Tower file no communications, no status updates, no committee notes, was to be forwarded to her personal email. Margot confirmed it. Naomi thanked her. The wall went back up. She made coffee and drove to the estate for Sunday dinner. Grace had arranged the seating again. Simone's chair was across from Caden. Naomi's was at the end. She sat down. She passed the breadbasket. She watched the room. She had 6 weeks. She intended to use them. Simone Park had been appearing in the Sutton family's calendar with increasing regularity, and the appearances had the quality of something orchestrated rather than incidental. A charity luncheon in mid-October that Grace mentioned on Wednesday, confirmed on Thursday, and attended with Simone on Friday. A family friend's birthday gathering the following weekend where Simone arrived 40 minutes before Naomi did, and was already settled in the drawing room when Naomi walked in. A Tuesday afternoon gallery opening, not a family event, not obligatory, that Grace mentioned to Caden directly and not to Naomi at all. These were small things. None of them were accusations. None of them were loud. That was how Grace worked. Naomi had understood this by the end of the 2nd month. The hostility was never direct enough to confront and never deniable enough to dismiss. It lived in the space between deliberate and plausible, and it had been refined over decades into something nearly invisible to the people who were absorbing it. Naomi absorbed it and kept notes in the way she kept notes on everything, not to build a case, but to understand a system. The Simone variable was legible. Simone had the right family name, the right social connections, the right radius of mutual acquaintance with the Suttons' professional network. From Grace's perspective, she represented the stable, predictable, correctly aligned partner that Naomi had never been. The logic was consistent, if not kind. What was harder to read was, Caden, he was not pursuing Simone. Naomi was certain of that. He was not unfaithful in the conventional sense, but he was comfortable in her presence in the way that people are comfortable around mirrors. Something in Simone reflected the version of Caden that Grace approved of, the version that appeared at family dinners and industry events, and conducted himself appropriately at everything he attended. And that comfort, the ease of it, the lack of any effort, it told Naomi something she had been trying not to register for weeks. He was not choosing Simone. But he was not choosing Naomi either. He was not choosing. There was a Thursday evening near the end of October when she came home to find him at the kitchen table with a set of architectural drawings and a message on the counter that said, "Dinner's in the fridge. I'll be here late." She made herself a plate and sat across the table from him, and they spent an hour in the same room without really being together. She asked a question about the drawings. He answered. He asked about her day. She said it was fine. He said his was fine too. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was two people who had stopped knowing how to fill it with something real. She washed her plate and went to the study. She sat at the desk for a long time without opening anything. She thought about what Ruth had said. She's going to push harder. She thought about the chair Simone was always in now. She thought about the 3-week cadence of family events, where Naomi's presence was incidental and Simone's was increasingly structural. She thought about a Monday 3 weeks earlier, when she had been in the Foster Holdings conference room at 10 in the morning, approving a land acquisition in the southern part of the state that would be developed into affordable commercial space for small businesses over the next 3 years. It was a project she cared about. One of the things about having this kind of power, which she had thought about more carefully than anyone would have guessed, was the question of what to do with it. Her father had made money in ways that were legal and often good. He had not always been thoughtful about what good meant. She was trying to be more deliberate. The acquisition had been approved. Her team had celebrated with the particular quiet satisfaction of people who understood what they were doing. Then she had driven to the estate for Sunday dinner and passed the breadbasket and watched Caden laugh at something Simone said. The two lives had never felt further apart. On a Friday in early November, she called Elliot James. "The post-nuptial analysis," she said. "I want to understand the timing on execution." "You can execute whenever you decide to," he said. He was careful with words, which was why she paid him to be. "The document is complete. The protections are what we discussed. Anything you came in with is yours. Anything held in the foster name is held separately, and the Meridian Tower situation is fully insulated. The recusal covers everything. Foster Holdings' involvement in Meridian Tower has no legal connection to your personal assets or your marital estate. The committee holds that process. You are not in the chain of authority. Good. She looked out the window of the study. One more thing. If the decision comes down while I'm still married, it doesn't matter, Elliot said. The recusal makes the committee's decision entirely independent. There's no conflict either way. You're clean, Naomi. She thanked him and ended the call. That evening, she found Caden in the living room. He was watching something on his phone, not really watching it, his attention elsewhere. She stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked up. Tired? He asked. A little. Dinner was. He gestured at the counter where a takeout container sat. I didn't plan ahead. That's all right. She came in and sat on the other end of the couch. Not close, but present. How was the drawing review? Good. Meridian Tower's addendum is almost done. We send it Monday, that's good. He nodded. A pause settled. He scrolled on his phone. She looked at the ceiling. Caden. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about it for a long, clear moment. There were many things she could have said. She settled on the most honest one. When did you stop asking how my day was? He looked at her. Something moved in his expression, not quite discomfort, more like recognition. I ask, you asked tonight because I came in. Not because you wanted to know. He was quiet. That was the thing about Caden, one of the original things she had loved about him. He didn't fill silence with deflection. He was quiet when he didn't have an answer. I've been distracted, he said finally. I know. She stood up. So have I. She picked up her bag. I'm going to bed. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark for a long time. She was not angry. Anger would have been simpler. What she felt was something quieter and more final, the recognition of a pattern she had been watching for months and could no longer pretend she was not seeing clearly. She opened her notebook in the dark and wrote one sentence. The question is not what he will choose. It is when I stop waiting to find out. She closed the notebook. She turned over. She did not sleep for a while, but she was not surprised. She had been prepared for this possibility since September. She had simply hoped, quietly, to be wrong. The dinner that changed things happened on a Saturday in mid-November. Grace was hosting 8 people, which was unusual for a Saturday. Not a Sunday dinner, but something more deliberate. A dinner with witnesses. The guests were 2 of Derek's business contacts, a developer named Richard Call who had driven in from the coast, a couple who were old family friends of the Suttons, and Simone, who arrived with a bottle of wine and the easy confidence of someone who had been expected. Naomi arrived on time, as she always did, and found the drinks already poured and the room already arranged. She was seated at the far end of the table, next to the elderly husband of the family friends, a man named Harold who was hard of hearing, delightful in conversation if you were patient, and not someone whose position in the seating chart indicated you were meant to be noticed by the room. Across from Harold's wife. Not across from Caden. Not near Derek's contacts. Naomi unfolded her napkin and helped Harold find the correct fork and said nothing about the arrangement. For the first hour, the dinner proceeded with the grammar she had memorized. Grace managed the conversation like a conductor, bringing in each voice at the right moment, letting Derek talk about Sutton Architecture's work in a way that was favorable and specific, letting Simone charm the table with a story about a charity gala that everyone at the center of the room found funny. Caden was at Grace's left, which was to say at the important end of the table, and he was present and engaged in the way he was when Grace's orchestration made it easy to be. Naomi talked to Harold. They discussed his son's medical practice and the weather in his home state. She was not performing patience. Harold was genuinely interesting once you paid attention, and she paid attention to everyone. Midway through the main course, Richard Call, seated between Derek and Simone, with the confident posture of a man who was used to being at the center of conversations about large amounts of money, looked up and across the table and said something that briefly stopped Naomi's fork. I keep feeling like we've met, he said directly to her. Do you work in development? She looked at him. He was in his mid-50s, well-traveled, The specific kind of sharpness that came from 20 years of due diligence, she said. Private finance, mostly. Private finance. He said it the way people repeat something when they're trying to place it. I was at a Foster Holdings function in September, roundtable on commercial development trends. I feel like Richard, Grace said, from the head of the table. Her voice was warm and completely controlled. I was just going to ask about the coastal project you mentioned, the waterfront development. Pamela said something about it. Richard looked at Grace. The momentum of his thought broke. He turned toward her, and the conversation moved. Naomi set her fork down carefully and looked at her plate. She had attended that Foster Holdings roundtable. She had been there in her capacity as principal authority, seated at the secondary table in the back half of the room, present but not introduced by name. It was a routine function, the kind of public-facing event the firm hosted quarterly to demonstrate community investment. She had spoken briefly to 3 people, shaken hands with 24, and left without being the subject of any conversation. She had been Naomi Foster that afternoon, not Naomi Sutton. Richard Call had been at that round table, and he had a face for details. He had not placed her completely. But he was close. Grace had stopped him. The irony of it was not lost on Naomi. The woman who spent Sunday dinners managing Naomi out of the room had just, accidentally, protected her cover. Grace had not done it for her. She had done it because she controlled the room, and she did not like variables, and she had redirected a conversation that was going somewhere she didn't recognize. The result was the same. Naomi's identity remained intact. For now. After the main course, Grace made a remark to the table at large, one of those precise social instruments that were aimed without appearing aimed. The family photograph for the annual board acknowledgement has always reflected Sutton Architecture's core team, she said. The people who represent the firm's direction. I think we may revisit the format this year to keep it current. She paused. Fresh energy. She did not look at Naomi. That was the sophistication of it. She never looked at Naomi. Caden set down his wine glass. He looked at the tablecloth. He did not look at his wife. He did not say anything. At the far end of the table, Harold was telling Naomi about a bridge he had crossed as a young man that no longer existed. She listened and responded and kept her hands still in her lap and said nothing about the family photograph or the direction or the fresh energies. After dessert, after the goodbyes, after the guests were mostly gone, and the household staff had begun the quiet work of clearing the kitchen, Ruth found Naomi in the hallway putting on her coat. He almost knew you, Ruth said. Her voice was low, not a question. He'll know eventually, Naomi said. They all will. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she did something odd and unexpected. She reached out and covered Naomi's hand with her own, briefly firmly, the way you hold something you don't want to break. Whatever comes, Ruth said, I want you to know that I think this family has been careless with something valuable. Naomi didn't speak for a moment. Thank you, she said. That means more than I know how to say. You don't to say it. Ruth let go of her hand. Just remember I said it. Naomi drove home through the November dark. She thought about the chair she wasn't in, about the conversation that had been redirected before it reached her, about the 3 seconds of silence that was becoming a habit between her and Caden. She thought about Richard Call and how close he had come. She thought about the notebook in her pocket and the things she had been writing in it for weeks. When she got home, she did not go to bed. She sat in the study and opened her laptop. She reviewed 2 documents, both personal, both related to what came next. She made a few notes in the margins. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark for a while, thinking clearly about the shape of the next 3 weeks. Then she called Elliot. I want to confirm everything is in order, she said. Everything is in order, he said. He had been her lawyer long enough to know when everything meant a specific list. I'll send you the confirmation summary by Monday morning. Thank you, she said. That's all. She ended the call and went to find the notebook. She opened it to the last entry and read it once, then turned the page and left it blank. She was ready. She had been ready for some time. She was simply waiting for the thing she needed to see to arrive. The week before Thanksgiving, Naomi spent 3 consecutive days at Foster Holdings without going to the estate. This was not unusual for her schedule. She was in the office 4 or 5 days a week, and the Sutton estate was not her home, but it felt different that week, in the way that things feel different when you are beginning to see them as what they are rather than what you wanted them to be. On Monday, the board approved a regional infrastructure bond that would fund 3 municipal bridge rehabilitations in the eastern part of the state. The projects were not glamorous, and the returns were steady rather than spectacular. But they were a kind of investment that actually mattered, the kind where the line between a financial decision and a community decision was thin enough to see through. Naomi had championed the bond for 2 years. She had run the risk models herself and presented them to the board 3 quarters, running until the economics were clean enough to move. When the vote came back unanimous, her CFO said, "Nice work," and she said thank you, and the meeting continued. On Tuesday, she received the conflict documentation package from Elliot James. It was thorough. It was watertight. It was the most well-prepared legal foundation she had seen for this kind of personal situation, which made sense because Elliot was the best, and she had given him enough time to do it right. She read it page by page at her desk in the hour before lunch, made 2 margin notes, and filed it in a locked drawer. On Wednesday, the Meridian Tower Committee sent its final notification to all technical review participants. The decision would be issued on the 12th, which was the date Margot had indicated 3 weeks ago. The notification was standard. Naomi did not receive it in her personal capacity. It went to the committee's distribution list, none of which included her. She knew about it because the committee's process coordinator had sent a general calendar confirmation to the Foster Holdings process team, and Margot had forwarded it to Naomi's work calendar with a single note, FYI, decision date, confirmed. Naomi noted it and moved on. At noon on Wednesday, she had lunch with a development partner who ran a small commercial real estate firm in the downtown district. He was a good person, careful with detail, honest about risk, the kind of partner who understood that a deal done right the first time was better than a deal done fast. They had worked together on 2 projects over 6 years. He talked about a new neighborhood they were considering for a mixed-income development. She listened and asked questions and contributed 3 observations that he wrote down because he found them useful and newful. When she got back to the office, Margot was at her desk with the week's afternoon calendar. "You have the infrastructure call at 2, Margot said. "The board of directors package needs your sign-off by Friday." And she paused, the pause of someone who was about to say something outside the normal range of the briefing. Caden called the main line. Naomi looked at her. "When?" "This morning, around 10. "What did he say?" "He asked if he could speak with you. The receptionist told him you were in meetings. He said he'd call back." Naomi said nothing for a moment. "He hasn't called back." "Not yet." She thought about this. Caden calling the main line meant he had searched for Foster Holdings, or had found it through some other channel, and had called it instead of her direct number. It meant he was approaching her professionally, not personally. Or it meant he was confirming something. "If he calls again," she said, "standard process, no special routing. Understood." She went into the 2 o'clock call. The infrastructure discussion was detailed and productive. She was fully present for it. She knew how to be fully present for things, which was one of the things her father had taught her. When you are in a room, be in it. Don't be somewhere else. The work doesn't benefit from a distracted mind, and neither does the person across the table from you. After the call, she sat in the conference room alone. Through the north window, the city was doing what it did in November: gray sky, bare trees in the plaza, the particular flat light that arrived with the cold and stayed until spring. She had been looking at this city from various heights for 12 years. She knew its patterns. She knew which developments were going to succeed and which were overextended. She knew which neighborhoods were stabilizing and which were being pressured. She knew where the infrastructure was aging fastest and where the investment would matter most. She thought about Caden calling the main line. She thought about what it meant that he had found it, had found her from the outside through a search or a referral or a directory, rather than from a conversation. She thought about what it would feel like to receive that call in her office and what she would say. She thought, this is what it looks like when someone finally starts asking. And then she thought, it's late. Not too late to matter, but late. She opened her personal notebook, the small one, different from her work notebooks, and looked at the last thing she'd written. The question is not what he will choose. It is when I stop waiting to find out. She turned to a new page and wrote, he's asking now. I wonder if he knows what he's asking. She closed it and picked up her bag and went to make the Friday sign-off deadline on the board package. That evening, she went to the estate. Not for a Sunday dinner, just because Grace had texted about a calendar item we need to discuss in the wording that Grace used when she had already decided something and was informing rather than consulting. When she arrived, Grace was alone in the sitting room. Caden was in his studio at the back of the estate working late. Derek and Pamela were away for the week. Grace offered her tea. Naomi accepted. They sat across from each other in the formal sitting room, with the fireplace going and the tea cooling between them. Grace looked at Naomi with the expression she had been wearing for 2 years, controlled, assessing, and entirely certain that she was looking at a person who did not fully understand the room she was in. I want to discuss the December plans, Grace said. The family has a way of doing certain things, and I think it would be helpful to have clarity about expectations. Of course, Naomi said. She listened to the expectations. They were what she expected. A specific holiday gathering, specific guests, a specific presentation of the family's professional image. She was referenced once, obliquely, as Caden's situation, not by name, not as a wife, as a situation. She set down her tea. I appreciate the clarity, she said. She thanked Grace and said goodnight and found Caden in his studio before leaving. He looked up from his drafting table, surprised to see her. I didn't know you were here. Grace wanted to talk about December plans. Ah. He looked at the drafting table. I should have warned you. You should have. She said it without heat, just as a statement of fact. He nodded. He looked like a man who knew he had failed at something specific and did not quite have the vocabulary for it yet. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. She looked at him. All right, she said. She left the estate and drove home through the November cold and thought about what it meant to believe in something past the point where believing in it was easy. She did not know yet whether she had reached that point. She suspected she was close. The estate weekend happened in late November, the weekend before Thanksgiving, and it was the kind of occasion that Grace organized with the thoroughness of someone staging a set. She had texted the invitation to Caden directly. Naomi had learned about it from Caden 2 days before, not because he had forgotten to tell her earlier, but because he had been slow about it in the way of a person who had already decided something and was waiting to find the right moment to explain. The right moment, apparently, was Tuesday evening, when he said my mother's doing a favans, the 22nd through the 24th, and left the question of whether Naomi was included implicit rather than stated. She drove to the estate Friday afternoon. Her bag was packed efficiently. When she arrived, Simone was already there. Simone had come the night before, apparently. She was settled in the guest suite on the 2nd floor and had been there long enough to have a place at the kitchen table during the morning routine. When Naomi arrived in the early afternoon, Simone was at the dining room table with Grace and 2 of Grace's friends, playing a card game, and the 4 of them were laughing in the easy shorthand of people who had been comfortable together for hours. Grace looked up. Naomi, good, you're here. She said it the way you say it when someone arrives at an event that has already established its configuration. Naomi said hello to the room, set her bag by the stairs, and found Caden in the library. He was at the window with his coffee, looking at the back lawn. He heard her come in and turned. For a moment he had the expression of a man who had been expecting a different version of the next few minutes. Did you know she'd be here already? Naomi asked. My mother mentioned it. He looked at the window. Thursday. I should have told you. You should have. She sat in the chair near the bookshelf, not confrontationally, just taking the space that was there. Is this a Sutton family weekend or a social occasion? He turned from the window. It's both. My mother. He stopped. He rubbed the side of his face. It was the gesture he made when he was going to say something honest and wasn't sure it was welcome. She likes Simone. She's always liked her. They go back a long way. I know. It's not. He stopped again. It's not what you're thinking. What am I thinking? He didn't answer. She looked at him steadily. I'm thinking your mother has been engineering this for 3 months, and you've been letting her, and now Simone is in the guest suite, and I'm here on a Friday afternoon having a conversation that should have happened in September. She paused. That's what I'm thinking. He looked at the floor. That floor looking, she recognized it now as a specific gesture, the one he made when he had run out of counter-argument, but hadn't yet found the honesty to say so. I don't know what I wants from this, he said. Yes, you do, Naomi said. She said it without anger, without accusation. Just as a clear thing in the air between them. You know exactly what she wants. You've known since the summer. He didn't deny it. The question, she said, standing, is whether you want the same thing. She left the library and went to find Ruth. Ruth was in the sitting room at the back of the house, the one that didn't have a fireplace and was slightly too cold in November but had the best light. She was reading. When Naomi came in and closed the door behind her, Ruth looked up over her glasses and said, Ah, hello, Naomi said. I saw your car arrive. Ruth closed her book. I also saw that you found the situation upstairs. I found the situation. Ruth looked at her, not with pity which Naomi would not have appreciated, but with the direct regard of someone who understood the dimensions of a problem. How bad is it? It's clarifying, Naomi said, which is almost the same thing. Ruth nodded slowly. Caden has never been good at choosing over his mother. He has always been good at designing around her, finding the shape that accommodates both. The problem is, she paused, that you can't accommodate a triangle. One of the 3 sides eventually gives. Naomi sat in the chair across from her. He called the main number at my office last week. Ruth's expression shifted. Did he? He didn't leave a message. He didn't call back. But he looked. He looked. Ruth absorbed this. He's been wondering for a while, she said. I've watched him not quite ask for 6 months. He has a quality. I've seen it since he was young, of almost having a thought, and then routing around it if the thought is uncomfortable. She turned her book over in her hands. It's a habit. Habits can be changed. But they usually require some outside force. I'm not interested in being someone's outside force, Naomi said. No, Ruth said. I know you're not. That's not what I'm suggesting. She looked at Naomi directly. I'm saying, he's close to something. Whether he gets there in time is another question. The weekend continued. Meals were prepared. Conversations happened. Simone was at every gathering, not aggressively, not dramatically. Just present in the way that someone is present when the structure of the room has been arranged around their presence. Caden was somewhere between the 2 women most of the time, not choosing, not acknowledging, managing the situation the way he had been managing everything, by not making it explicit. On Sunday morning, Naomi packed her bag. Caden found her in the guest room on the east side of the house, where she had been sleeping, not in the shared bedroom, which was an arrangement she had made quietly on the first night, without announcement. He stood in the doorway and looked at the bag. You're leaving today? I was planning to. She folded a sweater. You could come with me. A pause. I have dinner with Derek and my mother tonight. She looked at him. The bag was zipped. She stood and picked it up. All right, she said. She walked past him in the doorway. She found Ruth on the staircase landing and said goodbye properly. A real goodbye with eye contact and a brief hand on the older woman's arm. Ruth said quietly, Be well, Naomi. She meant it as something larger than the words. She drove home. She did not play music. She kept both hands on the wheel. At home, she went to the study and opened the desk drawer and looked at the documents Elliot had prepared. She did not need to read them again. She knew what they said. She put them back in the drawer. Then she called Margot. Next Thursday, she said. I need the morning blocked. Personal matter. Have the vehicles available by 7. Noted, Margot said. And I need the board informed that I may be unreachable from 9 to noon. I'll send the notification Monday. Thank you. She ended the call. She sat in the quiet of the study for a while. Through the window, the November light was the particular gray of something almost over. She was not sad. Sadness would have required surprise. She had known since September what the shape of this was. She had simply given it time to show her she was right. It had. She opened the desk drawer one more time. She looked at the documents. She closed the drawer. Thursday. 6 days. Grace's invitation for Thursday had been worded as a conversation, but Naomi had been at enough of Grace's conversations to understand the word was doing a great deal of work. She arrived at the estate Wednesday evening. The intention had been Thursday morning, but Grace had called in the afternoon and asked if she could come the night before instead, using the phrase family matters that are better discussed when there's time. Naomi had agreed. She brought her bag. She packed it at home with the particular methodical calm she brought to operational matters. Everything she would need, nothing she wouldn't, the specific economy of someone who had decided what they were doing before they started moving. She set it by the wardrobe at the estate guest room. She did not unpack it. After dinner, Caden, Grace, and Naomi, the three of them at a table that was too large and too quiet. Grace had gone to deal with correspondence, and Caden had gone to his studio. Naomi found herself in the small sitting room at the back of the house, the one Ruth preferred, where the light was better, and the room was slightly underheated in a way she had come to associate with honesty. Ruth was already there, as though she had known. She was reading, or holding a book in the approximate direction of reading, and she looked up when Naomi came in and said, "Close the door." Naomi closed the door. She sat in the chair across from her. The lamp on the table between them made a warm circle against the November dark outside. Everything was very still. "You're not going to fight for this," Ruth said. It was not a question. "Not the way she means," Naomi said. Ruth set the book down on her knee. She looked at Naomi in that way she had, the way that did not require any performance on either side. "I have been watching this family for 82 years, she said. "I know what Grace sounds like when she has decided something. I know what Caden sounds like when he has agreed to something he is not sure about." She paused. "I also know what you sound like. What do I sound like? Like someone who has been paying a debt she doesn't owe." Ruth's voice was gentle but precise, the voice of someone who had worked very hard to say things exactly. "You have been careful in this house. Patient. You have made it easy for people to be who they are, and what they've shown you is who they are." She looked down at the book for a moment, then back up. "That's not a failure, that's information." Naomi was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees at the back of the property. "I don't know exactly what you do," Ruth said. "You've never told me, and I haven't asked because I could see it wasn't the point. But I know what a person looks like when they carry something real. You carry it the way people carry things that actually matter. The stillness isn't emptiness. I want you to know I said that before, whatever happens tomorrow." Naomi looked at her. She was not going to cry. She was past that particular response, had learned to feel clearly without needing that release. But she was aware of the weight of being seen this precisely by someone she respected. "Thank you," she said. "Those are the truest things anyone in this family has said to me. The rest of them weren't looking. No." Ruth reached over and put her hand on Naomi's for a moment, brief, firm, the way you hold something carefully. Then she straightened. "When this is over," Ruth said, "I would like to write to you." "If you're willing, I'd like that," Naomi said. "Very much." Ruth nodded. She picked up her book. "Go sleep," she said. "Whatever's coming, you'll want to be rested." Naomi went to the guest room. She did not sleep quickly. She lay on her back in the dark and listened to the estate settle, the heating system, the old wood of the floors, the particular quiet of a large house when most of its people are in bed. She had listened to this quiet many times. She had made herself useful in this house without ever being asked. She had refilled Victor's coffee before he needed it, and remembered Harold's hearing problem, and asked Derek questions about his work that showed she had been listening to the previous answer. She had done all of that without expectation. Not as a strategy, just as the person she was. She thought about what came next. Tomorrow morning, Grace would have her conversation. Naomi already knew its shape. She had understood its shape since the weekend, when Simone had been installed in the chair and Caden had stayed for dinner. What she didn't know was precisely when during the morning it would happen, or how exactly the words would be arranged. She knew what she would do. She knew what she would not do. She thought about Marcus and about the dinner party where her name had become a number and the weeks that followed, and she thought about what it felt like to watch a relationship change overnight because of information that changed nothing fundamental about who she was. She thought about Caden calling the main line, about the pause before he hung up without leaving a message. She thought, he knew something was different about me. He chose not to ask. That's not the same as choosing not to know. The wind moved through the trees again. Somewhere below, a door closed quietly. She opened her phone and typed a message to Margot. Tomorrow at 7. Be ready, she sent it. Margot's response came in less than a minute. Understood. Cars confirmed. I'll have your documents ready. She closed the phone and set it on the nightstand. The room was very still. The November dark sat outside the windows without moving. She had been patient for 2 years, and the patience had told her what she needed to know, and now the patience was done. Not because she had given up. Because she had finished collecting the information she needed, and the information was complete. She had packed her bag. She had made her calls. She had let the people in this family show her who they were, and they had. She thought about the motorcycle timer she had run once, on a day when she had been thinking clearly about contingencies, 14 minutes from the office to the estate at standard traffic, with the vehicles she kept on standby. 14 minutes. She had always been very good at knowing how long things would take. She closed her eyes. After a while, she slept. The morning arrived with the particular cold clarity of a late November day where the sun is present, but gives no warmth. Naomi had been awake since 6. She had made coffee in the small kitchen off the east wing, the one the household staff used, which was the kitchen she preferred because it was functional, and no one was performing anything in it. She drank her coffee standing at the counter, looking out at the frost on the back lawn. The grass held the cold the way grass does in the hours, before the day gets warm enough to release it. At 6:45, she took her bag from the wardrobe. She set it by the door of the guest room. At 7, Grace was in the front hallway. Naomi had not heard her come downstairs. But when she came down with her bag, Grace was there, standing in the hallway with the posture of someone who had already decided how the next hour would go. She was dressed. She was composed. She had, Naomi understood, also not slept well. Caden was there too. He was standing 6 feet away, near the foot of the staircase, in the coat he had apparently put on with the intention of being present for this, and no clearer plan than that. His hands were in his pockets. He was looking at the floor. Grace did not look at the bag. She looked at Naomi with the expression she had been perfecting for 40 years, the one that communicated finality without requiring anger, the one that said this has already been decided and made the decision seem like something that had been arrived at reasonably. She had a single page in her hand. She set it on the console table by the hallway mirror, face up, where Naomi could see it. It was a separation agreement. Naomi looked at it without picking it up. The language was what she had expected. A mutual accommodation of needs, a temporary restructuring of household arrangements, language about professional focus and family direction, and a section that referenced social presentation with more words than the property section. It had been drafted carefully by someone who had practiced this. It had not been drafted this morning. She set it back on the table. She turned to Grace. "You don't belong in this family," Grace said. Her voice was even. She had been waiting to say this for 2 years, and the waiting had refined it into something cold and deliberate. "You never did. I think when you step back, you'll understand that this is the better path for everyone." Naomi looked at her for a moment. Then she turned to Caden. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the floor. The particular stillness of a man who has made a decision he does not respect himself for and is waiting for it to be complete. She could see the set of his jaw, the careful arrangement of his body, into something that looked like neutrality but was not. She waited. 3 seconds. 1. The sound of the house settling, the frost outside, the coffee she had made alone at 6 in the morning while everyone slept. 2. The 2 years of Sunday dinners, of passing bread baskets, of questions redirected, of chairs at the wrong end of the table, of conversations that stopped when she entered them. 3. The fact that he had called the main line and not left a message. The fact that he had been almost curious and then routed around it. The fact that he was standing in this hallway right now, not looking at her. He said nothing. She bent and picked up her bag from where she had set it by the bottom of the stairs. She folded her coat more firmly over her arm. She looked at Grace one more time. "I won't be signing that," she said. "That's your right," Grace said. "It is." She moved toward the door. She opened it and stepped outside. The cold air hit her precisely, sharp, clarifying, the kind of cold that does not permit indefiniteness. The gravel drive ran between the frost-stiff lawn and the front of the house, and then curved past the tree line to the gate. She stood on the top step. Behind her, the door opened again. Footsteps on the gravel. Caden, who had followed without quite knowing why, she could feel him standing a few feet away. She did not turn. She took out her phone. "Margot," she said, "I'm outside. Bring the car." The morning held its breath. The frost sat on the grass without moving. A sparrow landed on the bare branch of the oak at the edge of the drive and departed again. She could feel Caden standing there. She could feel him wanting to say something and not finding it. "Naomi." His voice was quiet, different suddenly. Carrying a note she had not heard from him before, something between urgency and something older, something real. "What's happening?" She did not answer. She looked at the gate. She had timed it. From the parking area behind the Foster Holdings building, through the city, to the estate gate. 14 minutes at standard morning traffic with the vehicles she kept on standby. She had timed it on a Sunday in October, in the early morning when she was thinking about contingencies. She had never expected to need the number, and then she had. The gate was 200 meters away, beyond the tree line. She was very good at waiting. She had been practicing it her whole life. The difference now was that she was not waiting for someone else. She was waiting for herself, for the moment when the thing she had set in motion arrived to meet her. In the east wing, a light came on, Derek waking early for once. Then another light, the kitchen, the household beginning. She stood at the edge of the gravel drive and looked at the gate and felt, for the first time in 2 years, no divided attention, no second calendar, no management of the room. Just the cold air and her coat over her arm and the absolute clarity of a woman who had given the people around her every fair chance she could think of and had received in return exactly the information she needed. She was not angry. She was not destroyed. She was ready. "Naomi." Caden's voice again, closer now. "Was any of it?" He stopped, tried again. "Was any of this real?" She did not turn. "All of it," she said. That was the problem. The sound came from beyond the tree line, multiple engines, unhurried, moving in formation. 14 minutes, almost exactly. She was going to be all right. She had known for some time that she was going to be all right. The sound grew closer. 3 black SUVs came through the estate gate in a controlled, unhurried formation. Not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate, the measured pace of vehicles that move this way because they always move this way, because the people inside them have learned that urgency is a kind of performance, and performance is the thing they have specifically decided not to do. An advanced team member walked ahead of the first vehicle, taking in the driveway perimeter with the practiced ease of someone who has done this 1,000 times and finds it unremarkable. One sweep of the drive, one look at the front steps, nothing confrontational, just thorough. Caden heard them first. He had been standing behind Naomi on the gravel, not speaking, and when the sound reached the driveway, he looked toward the gate with the automatic attention of someone who was expecting something ordinary and was not getting it. He frowned, took one step forward to look. The 3 vehicles pulled to a smooth stop in the circular drive. The rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Margot Chen stepped out, 41, dark-jacketed, leather portfolio under one arm, the composed efficiency of someone for whom this was Tuesday morning and not a dramatic event. She walked directly to Naomi, who had not moved, behind Margot. The small Foster Holdings insignia on the vehicle's rear quarter panels caught the morning light. Not large, not flashy, just present, the way the company itself was present, without announcement, without spectacle, as a simple fact, Miss Foster. Margot's voice was professional and warm. "The Independent Review Committee has finalized the Meridian Tower decision. Your team is assembled. We have the morning documents ready, and legal is confirmed for 10. She paused. "I also have the items you requested from Mr. James's office. Everything is in order." The words landed in the cold morning air and did not dissipate. On the front steps, Grace Sutton had appeared. Naomi had not heard her come out, but she was there now, both hands at her sides, in the composed posture she had maintained for 40 years. The posture held. But her expression, the expression that had been so precisely calibrated for so long, did something she had not permitted it to do in public since the early years of her widowhood. It cycled, through recognition, through calculation, through something that was not quite understanding, but was the first approach of it. Derek Sutton appeared in the doorway behind her, coffee mug in hand. He was still in the weekend clothes he'd come downstairs in. He was looking at the vehicles, and then he looked at the insignia, Foster Holdings. Derek set his coffee mug on the front step and did not pick it up again. He looked at the insignia for 3 full seconds. He looked at Margot. He looked at Naomi. He had spent 8 months trying to find the person inside that name. He had made 36 calls. He had hired a research firm to find a point of contact. He had prepared 2 separate pitch decks for 2 different imagined versions of the decision-maker. He had told his family that the anonymous backing on the Meridian Tower project was impossible to reach, like trying to call someone who didn't want to be found. The person he had been trying to reach was standing 6 feet from him in the same coat she had been wearing to Sunday dinners for 2 years. Grace's expression had settled into something, not the composure she usually maintained. Something below that, older, harder to manage. She was looking at the Foster Holdings insignia on the vehicle, and then at Naomi, and the sequence of that look told its own story. The moment when a person's entire architecture of assumption has to be revised faster than the mind can comfortably move. Caden was still standing in the driveway, 2 steps behind Naomi. He had not moved since the vehicles stopped. He was looking at his wife with an expression that had no practiced quality to it at all, raw, unmanaged, the face of a man who has understood something significant, and does not yet know the dimensions of what he's lost. Naomi turned. She looked at him for a moment. The morning light was behind her now, low and clear, and whatever was in her face was not performance. It had the quality of something that had been decided in advance and lived with and no longer needed to be performed because it was simply true. It was all real, she said. Everything in the last 3 years. That was the problem. She turned back toward Margot. "Ready," she said. She got in. The vehicle door closed with the particular density of something built for purpose. Margot settled in the front with the portfolio on her lap. The advance team returned to the perimeter vehicle. The motorcade began to move. It moved slowly the way it had arrived, deliberate, unhurried, the pace of something that does not need to perform urgency because it has never needed to. It turned at the end of the circular drive, and then it went through the gate, and then it was on the road, and then the road curved away from the estate, and then there was only the sound, fading, until that too was gone. The December morning settled back into the frost and the bare trees and the stillness. On the front steps, Grace Sutton stood without moving. The household staff was in the kitchen, working. They had heard the vehicles and gone deliberately quiet, which was the habit of people who understood when a room was not theirs. A sparrow on the oak at the edge of the drive, the creak of the house in the cold. Derek walked inside. He did not speak. He walked to sat at the desk, opened his laptop, and typed 2 words into the search bar: Foster Holdings. The results loaded in 4 seconds. The company profile was the first hit: Foster Holdings Group, private investment trust, founded by Arthur Foster, currently managed under private authority structure. Annual report excerpt. 2. $8 billion in assets under management across commercial real estate, private equity, and development capital. Current projects listed by category, not by name. The executive structure was listed without a named principal. He clicked through to a cached results page from a real estate industry publication, a profile of the company from 3 years prior, around the time of Arthur Foster's death and the trust's restructuring. There was one image, a board member photograph, 3 people seated, 1 standing. The person standing was identified in the caption as Principal Authority Foster Holdings Group and Zinstone as N. Foster. Derek looked at the photograph for a long time. He recognized the woman standing in it. He closed the laptop slowly. He sat at the desk with his hands flat on the surface and looked at the wall and let the information arrange itself into something he could carry. 8 months. 3 dozen calls. 2 pitch decks. She had been at his dinner table the entire time. Outside the study window, Caden was still in the driveway. He had not moved since the motorcade left. He was standing in the frost in his coat, looking at the gate, with the particular quality of someone who has understood something very clearly and very too late and is now processing the exact dimensions of what that means. Derek stood. He went to the front door. He opened it. "Come inside," he said. His brother turned. His face had a rawness to it that Derek had not seen from him in years. Not since their father died, not grief, exactly. More like the specific exposure of realizing that you have been looking at something for a long time and seeing only the surface of it. Caden came inside. Derek closed the door behind them. Grace was standing in the hallway, very straight, in the particular stillness of a woman who has managed everything for decades and has encountered something she cannot manage and does not yet know what to do instead. No one said anything for a moment. Then Derek, very quietly, said, "We never asked." It was not an accusation, it was just a fact, the clearest fact in the room, and the one that had no answer. Derek spent the hour after the motorcade left at his desk in the estate study, looking at screens. He had been systematic about it, which was how he processed most things. He started with the basics, the company profile, the assets, the structure, then worked outward, press mentions, industry publications, conference records, deal announcements. Foster Holdings did not appear often in any of these. That was clearly by design, but it appeared enough to build a picture. The picture had a total. He ran the number twice to be sure, and arrived at the same figure both times. He sat back in his chair. He thought about the 8 months of calls his research firm had made on his behalf, trying to find the decision-maker behind Meridian Tower. The politely worded deflections. The explanations that the holding company did not take unsolicited contact from vendors or partners. The one time his firm had found what they thought was a point of entry, a former Foster Holdings board member who knew someone who might know someone, and the connection had quietly failed to produce anything useful. He thought about Sunday dinners. Naomi at the far end of the table, Naomi passing the breadbasket. Naomi saying, "I work in private finance," mostly, and leaving the room by 3 beats, while his mother redirected the conversation. He thought about the Saturday in October, when he had laid out the Meridian Tower opportunity, and said, "If we land this, it changes everything," and Naomi had sat at the end of the table and said nothing. He understood, now, why she had said nothing. She had removed herself from the decision the morning she saw their firm's name on the bid list. She had called her attorney and filed the paperwork by end of day. The Meridian Tower review was not hers to influence. She had made sure of that immediately, without being asked, without telling anyone. The door he had spent 8 months trying to open was one she had closed herself, legally and permanently, the same day she found out it existed. He went to find Caden. His brother was in the east sitting room, the one Ruth preferred, with the lamp and the cold and the not quite adequate heating. He was in the chair by the window, looking at the frost on the back lawn. He looked the way people look when they are not looking at anything specific, just looking in the direction of what they're thinking about. Derek sat across from him. He told him what he had found. Not all of it at once. He laid it out the way he laid things out when he needed someone to track with him. Asset total, structure, decision authority, the Meridian Tower recusal, the date of the filing. Caden listened without interrupting. When Derek finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "The same day," Caden said. "The same day she saw our name on the list." Caden looked at the frost. She never said a word. "No, she could have." He turned to look at his brother. "She could have told me she was recused. She could have explained why she wasn't saying anything. She could have." He stopped. Derek waited. "She didn't say anything because the right thing to do was to not say anything," Caden said. He said it with the particular precision of a man who has just understood something clearly and is not enjoying understanding it, and she knew that, and she did it. "And no one asked her anything." He paused. "Not even me." No, Derek said. They sat with that for a while. Through the window, Ruth could be seen moving slowly across the Dassac lawn, in her coat and her good shoes, doing the morning walk she had been doing every day for 40 years. She did not look toward the study window. She was not performing obliviousness. She simply did not need to be looking in that direction to know what was happening indoors. Grace was in the kitchen for an hour, Derek said. I checked on her. She's all right. But he thought about how to say it accurately. She's been reorganizing the pantry. Caden made a sound that was not quite a laugh. That bad? That's her version of it. Grace's authority within the family had been maintained, for decades, through a combination of organization and strategic certainty. She had always known what she wanted, and had been very good at arranging for it. This morning, the arrangement had produced an outcome she had not anticipated and could not manage, and the response, reorganizing the pantry in the largest family kitchen in the house, was the version of that she could control. It was not nothing. It was also not sufficient. She thought Naomi was a problem to be solved, Derek said carefully. She wasn't wrong that there was a mismatch. She was looking at the wrong variable. She was looking at the wrong everything, Caden said. He stood. He went to the window. The frost was melting now, in patches, wherever the sun could reach it directly. I called her office, he said, last month. Derek looked up. Her office. The main line at Foster Holdings. I didn't know it was that. I found the number through a business directory I was looking for. He stopped. I had been having a feeling for months that there was something I wasn't seeing. I called, and the receptionist said she was unavailable, and I hung up. He paused. I didn't call back. Why not? He thought about it. He had the habit, when a question was real, of actually sitting with it before answering. Because if I called back, I'd have to be curious about the answer, and he turned from the window. I had been choosing not to be curious for a long time. It was easier. Derek did not say anything. She told me, Caden said. On our third date, she said she kept her professional life private because the last time she didn't, it ended something. She said she was waiting to see if that mattered to me. He was looking at the frost again. I said I didn't need to know her resume to know who she was. Did you mean it? I meant it when I said it. He paused. I didn't know what it was going to cost me to keep meaning it. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then, the Meridian Tower result comes from the committee on the 12th. I know. If it's awarded to us, it's awarded on merit. Nothing to do with her. I know that too. A pause. She did the right thing, Derek said. Completely. Immediately. Without being asked. I know. Caden's voice had a quality that Derek had not heard from him since their father died. The particular quality of a person who is past deflection and is simply dealing with the fact of something. I know exactly what she did. He left the study and went upstairs. He sat at the desk in the bedroom, the one they had shared in the early years, before the weekend sleeping arrangements had shifted, and he sat for a long time looking at the desk surface. Then he took out a piece of paper and began to write. He did not have a plan. He was not certain she would read it. He was not even certain he would send it. But he had a habit, learned late, of filling silence with the thing he meant to say instead of the thing he was waiting to figure out, and what he meant to say was beginning, slowly, to have a shape. Ruth appeared in the doorway after an hour. I'm going to write to her, she said. I want to make sure she has an address. Caden looked up. I'll find one. Through her firm? Through her firm, he looked at the piece of paper. I'll get you an address. Ruth nodded. She looked at him with the directness she had been practicing for 80 years. She was a good person in this house, Caden. Whatever else happened, I know, he said. Good, Ruth said. Don't forget it. She went back downstairs. Caden looked at the paper. He picked up his pen and kept writing. 6 weeks later, the Foster Holdings offices were quiet on a Friday afternoon. Most of the team had left by 3:30. The end-of-year accounting cycle had been intense. And Margot had sent everyone home early with the particular practical kindness of someone who understood that people work better when they're not running on empty. The conference rooms were dark. The admin area was silent. The overhead lights had gone to the low-energy setting they defaulted to after 5. Naomi was still at her desk. She was reviewing a bond prospectus for a regional transit project. Not urgent, but interesting, the kind of work she did best when the building was quiet and the deadline pressure was off. She had a cup of tea that had gone cold at her right hand. The city was gray and still in the late December light outside the north-facing window. It was, she had noticed in the 6 weeks since leaving the estate, the most she had felt like herself in a long time. Not because anything had resolved cleanly, it hadn't. There were still documents to finalize, legal proceedings to complete, the particular logistics of separating two lives that had been partially merged over 3 years. These were not painful, exactly. They were just work, and work was something she had always been able to do. What had changed was the absence of the second calendar. She had not realized, until it stopped, how much energy she had been spending on it. The managed composure at the dinner table, the careful positioning at the wrong end of the room, the calculation of how much to say and what to leave out, and when it was safe to be herself and when it wasn't. She had been carrying that alongside everything else for 2 years, and she had been so practiced at it that she had almost stopped feeling its weight. Without it, she was lighter than she expected to be. On the 12th, exactly when Margot had indicated it would, the Meridian Tower decision had been issued by the Independent Review Committee. Sutton Architecture Group had been awarded the design contract. The committee's scoring summary had been distributed to all bidders the following morning. Technical quality, project comprehension, sustainability integration, and cost management. Sutton Architecture's technical proposal had ranked first in 3 of the 4 categories. The award was clean. It was exactly what Caden had said he wanted on that afternoon in October, a win on merit, not on a phone call. Naomi had read the summary in the neutral document format that Foster Holdings' administrative system used for all external regulatory filings. She had read it once, noted the outcome, and closed the file. She was not recused from knowing the result, only from influencing it. The result had been produced without her, by a committee doing its job, exactly as it should have been. She thought, good for them. She meant it without reservation. There had been a brief formal acknowledgement from Sutton Architecture's legal team, a note sent to the Foster Holdings process address, thanking the administration for a fair and rigorous review. It was signed by the firm's managing partner. At the bottom, in a separate line beneath the signature block, a second signature, Caden Sutton, Principal Architect. Nothing else. Just the name. She had looked at the name for a moment. Then she had filed the letter in the project documentation folder and moved on. The 2 letters arrived on the same day through different channels. Ruth's came through an actual courier, a small envelope with Ruth's handwriting on the front, which Margot had brought in without comment, and set on the corner of the desks with the same neutral efficiency she brought to everything. Ruth Sutton. The return address said, for Naomi Foster, not Naomi Sutton. The envelope from Caden arrived through the firm's general correspondence address, a personal letter, routed by the intake coordinator to Naomi's attention, with a note that it had come from a private address, not from Sutton Architecture's firm account. He had found the address himself. Naomi picked up Ruth's envelope first. It was a single page. Ruth's handwriting was what you would expect from a woman who had been paying close attention to things for 82 years, careful and economical, with a slight forward lean that suggested confidence. Dear Naomi, it began. I do not intend to explain or apologize on behalf of this family, because that is not something I have the authority to do, and you deserve better than an apology that stands in for the people who owe you the direct one. What I do have authority to say is this: I saw you, not what I thought you might be, or what would have been convenient for me to see, but you. The care you put into rooms that didn't value you, the attention you paid to people who weren't paying any back. The particular steadiness of someone carrying something real and choosing not to make it a performance. I have been around enough people in my life to know that steadiness doesn't come from having nothing to prove. It comes from already knowing the answer. I hope you are somewhere today where the answer gets to just be itself without management. I would like to write to you again, if you'll allow it, Ruth. Naomi set the letter down on the desk. She sat with it for a moment. Not crying, she was past that particular response, had been for some time, but aware of the specific weight of being truly seen by someone, and of how rare that was, and the fact that the person who had seen her most clearly had been the 82-year-old woman at the cold end of the room with the good light. She picked up Caden's letter. It was a page and a half. He had a different writing style than Ruth. Architects tended toward the specific and technical, and his was no exception. He did not explain. He did not ask for anything. He named in clear and exact language what he had done and what he understood about it now. He said, "You told me what you were protecting on our third date. You told me what you were waiting for. I agreed to try. I stopped trying, without noticing I had stopped, and I let other people's preferences become my defaults. And I wasn't honest enough with myself or with you about any of it until you were already gone," he said. "My father would have told me exactly this. He would have been very precise about it, and he would not have been unkind. That is what I am trying to do now," he said. "I don't know what you want or whether anything I say now is useful to you, but you once said you deserved someone who was curious about your life. I am. I have been. I was just afraid to show it, and that is not the same thing as not feeling it." She set the letter on top of Ruth's. She sat at her desk in the quiet of the empty office in the December afternoon, with the city doing what cities do in winter, moving forward, carrying its people, full of lives happening on both sides of glass. She did not answer either letter yet. She was not ready to, and she had made a decision, sometime in the 6 weeks since leaving the estate, that she would not make any more choices from a position of management, of calculation, of deciding what was safe before she had decided what was true. She would know when she was ready. She would answer then. She opened the top desk drawer and set both letters inside. Carefully. Not filed away. Just kept. She looked at the prospectus on her desk. Then at the city through the window. Then at the drawer. She closed the drawer. She picked up the prospectus, poured herself a fresh cup of tea, and kept working. The afternoon light moved across the floor of the office in the slow way of winter light, patient and unhurried. She was going to be all right. She had always been going to be all right. She was just, finally, the only person who needed to know that. If you've ever waited for someone to see you, and found, when they didn't, that you still knew your own worth, this one was for you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay for the next story. The best ones are always about what people find when they finally stop looking away.